Welcome to the podcast. This is Craig Minter, and he knows his stuff. Okay, he helps directors and ops managers and leaders to grow their businesses in a way that works, and he helps people avoid the pitfalls. And there is so much pain right now in NDIS world when leaders are looking at their Xero or their bank account or whatever and going, why is nothing working? And Greg helps people with that sort of stuff. Greg, why do you talk about people having profit first as opposed to paying expenses first? Why are you passionate about business owners actually earning a decent quid from their business instead of just acting like they're slaves to it? Why are you so keen on this, Craig?
I'm so keen on it because, we've been conditioned to think differently around money at the end of the day. And, you touched upon there in your introduction around looking at your financial reports and those sorts of things. And so I'm an accountant by background, and I've done the uni degree. I've worked in businesses. I've run my own businesses and the like. And I've historically followed that idea of, hey, let's look at financial reports and know our numbers, learn our numbers and the like. But it doesn't help us with how we behaviorally think about money. And you and I, in our personal life and in our businesses and everywhere around, is we look at our bank accounts to tell us how we're actually doing financially. So we follow the cash, and the cash is what actually tells your story. But, our financial reports tell a different story from a behavioral standpoint. If you look at any financial report, look at revenue at the top, cash in at the top, which is cool. Every business needs to make money to actually have a business. So that's good. That still stays number one. But the next thing we look at is expenses. And then profit or loss that sits on the bottom of a financial report. It's an afterthought. It's kind of like we make all this money, we spend all this money, and then it's a bit of a happen chance as to what happens at the bottom. And so this idea of thinking of your profit first just changes that idea. And as human beings, with a primacy effect, we focus on what comes first. And if we flip that idea of, well, let's think of profit first, we're thinking about how are we profitable, how are we sustainable, and coming in and we put some money aside for profit to create the sustainable business and those sorts of things, then how much do we need to manage? How much left do we have to operate the business sustainably? And so it's just that reversal from a behavioral standpoint that actually ties in with how people generally operate their money in any case.
That makes sense. And I guess what you're saying is you must make a profit. Now, here in NDIS world, profit is almost a dirty word. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's almost like we've collectively lost our brains and we think that the whole world is just going to operate without a profit, despite the fact that all through history that's never worked. And I think of, say, you're a profit first person, or I think of, say, Paul Bryan's the profitable provider. It's almost like there's this self-righteousness among people when they're not business owners that, oh, you shouldn't be making a profit. But why is profit such a dirty word?
It is a fascinating question, Michael, that idea, and especially in the NDIS space, in the health space. I think it really comes from this idea of, hey, I need to be looking after people, and I need to be I'm a very person-centered approach to how I do things, and that by doing that, that there's a cost. The balancing part is I can help all these people, but I can't make money. Or it's the mindset piece around that I think he just flowed through how it sort of evolved. And it's kind of like, we've got to help people, but if we're then seen to be making money off that, it's kind of, it makes people feel a bit uncomfortable and a bit awkward. But as you touched upon, this idea of, well, from a business sense, the reality is the economies here in Australia and around the world are basically built upon small business, and small businesses need to be profitable, otherwise they don't last. And therefore they can't serve the clientele wherever they are. And obviously in the NDIS space, we need to have profitable, sustainable businesses so that we can serve more people, so that there's less waiting times, so that there's all these things. And it is that sort of shift in mentality of just repositioning the money mindset idea of that as well.
I hear you. And I also see the wisdom in what you're saying. You're like, hold on, it's not so much, profit is not a negative word, because profit means that you can have the room, the space in your bank account to actually serve people better. And I guess the other thing that goes through my head is that you work with people across many industries. And what would you say in other industries, I'll come back to NDIS in a minute, what would you say in other industries is a good standard profit margin to be aiming for? And I know that you're not all about profit margin. I get that. But what would you think is reasonable in most industries to aim for as a business owner with maybe a revenue of, let's say if someone has $2 million and about 10 staff, what would you be looking to hope that they're taking out as profit from that business?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and you know, profit margin as a word is, or a phrase or a thing is something interesting because everybody can look at the same set of results and interpret them a little bit differently.
Yep.
So that's why I struggle with that. And so again, I'll come from the notion of taking cash profit, which is different to profit margin, and it's this idea of a business of that size that you're talking about. I'd probably say it's going to be around 15%, but you know, if you go a little bit larger, then you're going up to that 20% mark. If you're sort of into that 4 to 5 million mark, you're sort of going 20%, which, you know, from a profit margin, so that's profit of what serves the business, but then there's also a component where the business owner gets a percentage of, well, you get paid for doing the work in the business as well, which is sort of, again, another component of where does cash flow throughout a business. But yeah, there's my sort of roundabout answer as to how I approach that idea of profit sort of notion. But yeah, I'd say 15 to 20% with the size of business.
Well, let's take the idea of 20% profit, right? 20% profit on a $2 million revenue size business in the NDIS would be a $400,000 profit. And then what you're saying is you'd like to see the owner take a decent amount of that. Now, the truth is, Craig, have a guess for me what you think most, we'll say the median NDIS business profit margin is. Okay, not the average, the median. What would you imagine?
Median. I'd be guessing around 5.
5%. Okay. Yeah. Go lower. Try again.
Yeah, right. 2.
It's 2%. 2% for the good players. Okay, at scale, that's what the good players are telling me is their profit margin. Now, you'll have some exceptions to that. There's some allied health exceptions, and there's some sort of like highly specialized people, like say your clinical psychs. They live in a different realm. They have smaller businesses with less expenses, and they make much bigger profits. But at scale, 2% seems to be what people are saying is what they're making. And I guess my question is, what are we doing, Craig? How can we change this? This should not be so. What's going through your head, Craig, when I say that?
Yeah, what's going through my head is that, number one, it's not surprising in as much, again, we work with NDIS businesses, allied health businesses, and also some to a lesser extent in other areas, in other fields. But yeah, what happens on the ground is, yeah, it's concerning at the end of the day. And that's where people that end up talking to us, you're like, whoa, what's going on? But for me, it always comes back to that notion of, again, it's a simple phrase that's been used a lot, but knowing your numbers. But again, it's up to people to be able to educate business owners, leaders around, well, what is actually going to work for them in a way that will, you know, resonate for people to buy into the idea of what the numbers are and how that flows through. And then just being able to join those dots between, hey, cash comes in the door, how do we need to actually leverage this? And you know, we always talk about giving money a purpose. So every dollar that comes in the door has a purpose, whether that's to you know, pay team members who then go and do the work, whether it's to, you know, support the community via taxes. Everything has a purpose. Support the business owner and nourish them through the profit, through an owner's pay amount. And you know, we always come from that approach of, if people feel as though they feel safe, secure, and comfortable around money, around finances, then they're going to be able to make better, more intentional decisions. And that sort of comes to this idea. We talk about financial brain care. The reality is, practitioners, allied health people, NDI service providers, they're great at doing what they do, providing the service, providing the support and those sorts of things, but they haven't had the education. Our school system doesn't educate around money. It doesn't talk about these things. And
can I tap into something you just said there? if
Yeah.
that's right, I forgot to interrupt you, Craig. You just said
Yeah.
that you find these amazingly talented providers. Like I'm thinking right now of a dietitian who is so talented, not the world's best at accounting. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of an OT I know who is unbelievably talented, terrible at their own marketing. I'm thinking of, say, a speech therapist I know who, would probably be one of the best speech therapists in Australia in her niche, in her area of speech therapy, and yet she just doesn't know how to communicate what it is that makes her special. Therefore, she gets paid half as much as she should. So I'm like, how do those people go from being just someone who's great at their craft to someone who's also great at running a business, Craig?
Yeah, it's so true. And again, I'm in the same space. I want them to be the best in their field at what they do. I don't want them to be the best accountant, the best marketer, and those sorts of things. And so when it comes to running a business, for me, it is creating teams, creating the support, creating the networks that is going to help you do and achieve what you want to do. And, from the financial side of that, if you're thinking of a financial team, the reality is small business owners, again, aren't educated what a financial team actually even looks like. And I'm sure, Michael, when you started in business and your listeners there, we start in business and we go get an accountant because we kind of know, well, you have to do that. We need to get a company set up
The
or
ATO
whatever
will
it
have a
is.
conversation with us if we don't. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, basically. And so we get an accountant and we think, okay, this is going to be the be all and end all. They're going to cover all my financial stuff. They're going to teach me. They're going to educate me. They're going to be my sounding board and all that, all those kind of things. But that's not what happens. If you go to some of these larger businesses and even bigger than some of the sizes you've talked about, the ones that we've worked in, a financial team is, 10, 20 people by itself. When you work in public health organisations like I have, they're massive teams to be able to do because everybody has different skills, different expertise. And it's, in small business, the accountants, they're tied up doing a lot of the compliance and structures and those sorts of things. And again, I want them to do that. I want them to do really good because I want business owners to make, nice profits, nice money and all the rest of it. And we need to be tax efficient. We don't want to pay anything that we don't need to pay and the like. But it's that they often don't have the skill set in other areas like the day-to-day financial decision-making skill set, the strategic planning skill set, the reconciliations. Some accountants out there, they've gone past the level of being in the detail of reconciliations. We want, bookkeepers or admin assistants doing those types of activities. And so, building teams around people in any space, whether it's the financial one that I've just touched upon there, whether it's the wider network, in the marketing space, in the operations space, get reasonable and have a knowledge and an understanding. You're the decision maker at the end of the day. You need to be aware and across those things so you never abdicate responsibility for those at the highest level. You're the one that's still signing those off, but surround yourself with teams and education that can support you to the level that you need to know, that can tie the dots together to get the outcomes that you're after.
10 out of 10. It makes so much sense. Okay. And the other thing is someone who is, say, at a $10 million revenue business, and I know that's not a lot of our listeners are, but let's imagine if you were, they can just pay someone like Craig to come and solve their financial stuff for them. Someone who's, say, an allied health provider who has 3 staff. Let's imagine they've got a turnover of, say, 1.5 million a year, and by the way, to those listeners who think, I'll never be 1.5 million, honestly, it happens in the blink of an eye. You'll be amazed at how quickly you grow when you get other things like your marketing or your service delivery right. But let's say, Craig, pretend for a moment you're that allied health provider. You started as a one-person show, and now you've got 2 staff. Your turnover for the year is $1.5 million, and let's imagine your profit margin is only 5%. Okay, remember that's better than most NDIS businesses, but let's pretend your profit margin is 5%. So $1.5 million means at the end of the financial year, you've got what? $225,000 worth of profit. And let's say that NDIS was to come in and make a change that halved your profits, which could well happen. In fact, everyone's dreading the 1st of July this year when the awards change. But if your profits were to halve, Craig, what would you do? What are the first things you'd go and check? What rocks would you turn over to go and find gems under those rocks? What would you do to build your own financial firepower if that happened to you?
Yeah, the very first thing I'm doing is I'm taking stock of what's my cash position. I need to be super clear on what my cash position is right now.
How much money
Cash
is in the
trumps
bank?
how much money have I got in the bank? And that is going to dictate what is possible at the end of the day for
Okay.
any changes that are going to
Let's
happen.
imagine you got
That's
30K in the bank.
yeah. Well, if you've got nothing in the bank, then at the end of the day, we say nothing, 30K is not nothing, again, depending upon the timeline. So when I come back to, I want to get my financial brain care in order. If I've got my financial brain care in order, any changes, good, bad, or indifferent, means that I'm feeling safe, I'm feeling secure, regardless of what the dollar number is. And with that then comes the idea of forecasting. So having financial brain care is being able to predict what's going to happen and guess, have some scenarios so that if something does change, I've got a plan. And so I want to know straight away, I've got 30K in the bank. Well, what's coming in the next 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from both historical money owed to me versus what the activity is going to bring in? How am I going to service that? What does the current team look like? Well, if that halves overnight, straight away the question comes, well, what is the new team structure that I obviously need? That's the biggest expense in all that. What is going to support that? So do I have the right team for the right work? And again, what's the level of work? So if it's half the work of all the real high-end need stuff that goes, well, hey, which of these are the team members that are going to be best suited at the most effective rate that is going to help me maintain my sustainable margins
I
that,
love what
we're
you're
coming
saying.
to.
So one of the first rocks that you'd turn over is, are we paying staff to do unnecessary tasks, or are we paying super talented staff to do simple tasks? So the first rock you would look under is, are we overpaying staff? Because obviously if you're overpaying staff, well then your super, like there's 12% gone right there. Your workers' comp, there's another 1.5% or whatever you're facing. So, okay, so you would start by looking at your
People, it's the
first.
biggest dollar impact usually, again, whether it's premises or people.
Okay, premises people,
Again,
because people have this
depending
big
on if
thing.
people have a premises and the like are often the big ones. But in NDIS allied health space, people is the biggest trigger to your margin and the like. So it's understanding that side of things. Yeah, is the first
Okay,
thing
so
I'm
that's
looking at.
job one, you people. And obviously that's a hard conversation. No one wants to tell someone they don't have a job. But I mean, if the reality is 10 of you don't have a job because we kept one person on too long, that's a bigger problem. Okay, so that's
Correct.
problem
Yeah.
one that needs to be addressed. What would you say is number two? You said premises. Okay, so if you've got premises, what do you do?
If there's premises, it's again understanding the lay of the land of what that is. Again, you're obviously looking into your lease agreements and those sorts of things. Or again, if you're just renting space, you're managing that to the best ability that you can. And again, having conversations at the end of the day around that, minimising again, what do we need space wise? Is it a change? Is it looking at what those implications are for, do we need a premises? How do we operate? If we're operating at half of what we were before, do we be more flexible? Again, we've talked to many amazing practitioners out there who in the allied health space as well that have looked at that whole picture very differently and don't have a premises, and they might work out a shared office spaces and again, more flexible in lease terms, cost wise, and those sorts of things, which opens up different opportunities in how we deliver a service and the like. And so that idea of how do we deliver, which is sometimes tied to premises or the like, is the other side of things. What's our model?
It's funny you say
Again,
that.
looking at the big picture, what is our model at this revenue point? Our
That
model
makes
may
sense.
change depending on the size of our business.
Yeah, and I'm thinking I had a conversation earlier this week with the managing director of a fairly large NDIS provider, and he was saying that his staff want him to open up a new premises, like a big premises for all these programs, and he said to them, "No, go and talk to the local council and get some town hall sort of stuff. Like go and get some community centres." He's like, "Why would I spend 300 grand on a premises when I can spend over 3 years maybe 30 or 50 grand?" we don't need to own the space. That's crazy. And so he was thinking like you're thinking, but he was thinking that before the disaster hits. Okay. So let's imagine that the clock ticks over. It's 1st of July. You've dealt with, okay, staff. We've minimized how many unnecessary staff we have. Most staff are necessary, but not all. You've dealt with the premises side. What would be another rock you would turn over if NDIS disasters were to happen? Where else would you look to find some savings or to somehow deal with that profit?
Yeah, they come back to the profitability. The two other components that that I always looking at is any flexibility on pricing. Obviously, NDIS, particularly that is challenging.
You don't have that magic button, do you?
You don't have that again. But there's other. Is there other services that we can provide around that is value add that we can package or whatever it is? And again, it's this idea of thinking outside of the circle of that, and then applying that same sort of thinking to the general expenses. It is, I strongly always recommend of doing an expense review. So the next part is then literally going into the detail of all your other expenses to basically go through a fine tooth comb and what do we need at this level. Again, whether you're growing or whether you're downsizing. For this, being conscious of what are the requirements. If we've only got this much money coming in, we've only got this percentage to actually play with on our expenses. So how do we go about that? Well, we need to fine tune and think creatively. And it's this idea that, circle back to that comment around profit first. If we're taking profit out and we're putting money aside for tax and we're paying ourselves as the owner, based upon this revenue level, this is how much we need to operate off. So again, those big ticket items that we've touched upon, well, then we've only got this much money. What do we need to deliver? What do we need to use for that? What is our software? What is our marketing? What's the return that we're getting on that? And we just need to be super clear and conscious of that, which is, if I think of expenses, it's kind of two things. It's, am I getting a return on investment for that? So if I'm going to spend any money, I don't use the word spending money. Everything is an investment. And if it's an investment to make money, get the right marketing in place, what's the margin, what's the returns on those over a time period? Again, it may not happen straight away, but let's be clear, know our cash position, how long is it going to take to get it to where we need it to hit our new numbers. Or it's the time saved. By doing this, has it saved me time? Between that, do I need that, pay that now? Do I need to have that expense now? And if we ask that question, is this totally necessary today? And if I say, oh, no, I can get away another day. Ask the same question tomorrow. Ask the same question the next day. Sometimes you'll be like, actually, no, I don't really need that. So when I'm looking at, what we're spending money on, is it truly an investment? Is it making us money or is it saving us time and energy? And going through all expenses to go to that level of detail.
That's intelligent. That's so smart. What you're saying is a lot of us, we pay someone to do work for us. Like say if someone outsources their marketing, okay? It's because one will get done better, but two, that might be costing that managing director 10 hours a week. They can get that 10 hours a week back. And what you're saying is when things get really tough, you bring that stuff back in-house back to your own desk because the circumstances dictate it. Here's a question that
But I'll just jump in on that. No,
go for it.
I wouldn't say it's going to say we bring it back in-house. I don't think downsizing means we bring everything in-house.
What's it mean?
Because time is actually more value at the end of the day. Do I want my general manager, do I want my senior executive leadership team doing day-to-day marketing? Probably not. So what is our ability to tweak that? Hey, how do we get the team doing more that actually helps potentially the marketing that we might have out there? So how can we re-engineer, again, our model, our marketing model, our whatever it is? And it doesn't, sometimes it might be bringing in the house, but I don't think it is always. Again, because often the trade-off there is the time factor.
I hear what you're saying.
And the time factor is so important for that idea that I was touching on. What's the return on investment? Well, return on investment is the key part. My time and energy, I need to get this return. Where's my time best spent? And yes, you've got to make prioritization decisions around what's the bigger focus now. Is it the financial side and the forecast and getting those foundations in place, or is it we need to generate more revenue that is profitable? So again, the trap people will fall into is, I just need to make more revenue. And that's not the answer. We just need to make more profitable
That's
revenue
right. Because
is the
especially when you
actual
look at
answer.
a lot of what's happening in community access, people are actually running at a loss when they take into account what they're paying their staff and the super, and then the admin time to facilitate that. And a lot of that they can't charge as face to face, and non face to face time. And what you're saying is so intelligent. You could double your revenue, but if you haven't added a dollar of profit, you're wasting your life. And the other thing you said there that I think is so important is when you're saying reducing your expenses doesn't necessarily bring everything back in house. It's like there are people who sometimes ask me to come into their business and look at what's happening in their marketing. So they're paying a very small amount for an expert to look and tell them what to do next without having to implement. So sometimes it's actually cheaper to get an expert in to come and look around. So that's where someone might say, Craig, come and look around our business, show us what we need to fix. We'll fix it ourselves, but show us what we need to fix. Can I ask you a question, Craig, that I'm almost scared to ask? Is that okay?
Fire away.
Let's imagine if someone come 1st of July and the award rate has just skyrocketed and NDIA somehow forgot to increase the price guide to match that. Well, there are some people who just need to wrap up their business and call it a day at that point. Because if you've already been struggling before then and then you have even less profit margin, honestly, what are you doing with your life? You could be hanging out with your kids. You could be working a job at Woolworths. You could be doing anything that means that when it's 7 p.m. at night, you're at home having dinner instead of sitting on zero in front of your computer. So, Craig, what would be your recommendation to anyone who does have to wrap up? Like, how do they assess, is it time to wrap up? And then how do they do that well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And to be honest, it's not my expertise at that stage of how to wrap up. That 100%
What
is
about the thought
definitely
process? Can you walk us through the thought process?
So I guess just to highlight that though, that example is that's where you are talking with your tax and your compliance
No, that's not what I mean. I mean the decision.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah, I've
the
not been
decision
clear.
making to get there
Yeah.
comes back to knowing those numbers from the cash perspective of what's coming in, what's going out, what's that going to look like, what are the gaps, and assessing that. How long would it take? How deep are my pockets to be able to turn it around? And that's where you're looking at the end of the day, whether that's, hey, we need to change, we need to assess, and yes, we can potentially do it. And this is what the model would look like. And we put a roadmap in place and we have a time frame to do that. A big fan of doing those numbers, being conscious and aware of what that picture looks like, because it will paint a picture. That's where having a forecast of any sort, and we do it from day one with any client that we have, is let's see what the financial picture will look like in terms of cash in, cash out. Not what a profit and loss report tells us, not what a balance sheet tells us. Here's what it looks like from a cash. And if it doesn't look great, then at least you will see what the bottom point of it is. And then the question becomes, can I afford that bottom point at that point in time? Yes or no? Is it worthwhile if I do that trade-off between time with my family, time to go do what I want to do versus the go get employment somewhere else where I don't have the, outside of 9 to 5 stresses that we all have as a business owner and the like. And I just want people to have an intentional thought process. And that's the thought process comes down to having a way to make financial decisions and being able to see what the implications of those decisions are. And again, no one's perfect at this. I've been forecasting for 20, 30 years, and you don't get 100% spot on, but you get better. It's a trained muscle. Forecasting is trained. It's putting something out there and learning from it, getting feedback from what actually happens versus what actually we thought might have happened. And we have to start that process. And the best time to start that is right now. Start forecasting, even if it's in small amounts, because if we're doing a forecast now, we're worried about July 1. My 100% guess is the low point that somebody might see will be the end of July or something like that. And I want to know what that picture looks like now. At least I've got a runway to then be able to do something about it and have these decisions and intentions from a state of thoughtfulness rather than a state of panic if I start looking at that at July 1. If I start looking at it then, I go into panic, I go into fight, flight or freeze, and then I don't make my best financial decisions. And if you think of something like, a pandemic hits, whether it's macro whole world events, whether it's, the level of NDIS, there's always these cycles that happen. We had a client that, lost 5 team members within a few weeks due to different reasons. Personal reasons, it wasn't really their fault. Then they had bushfires hit their business area where they lived. Then they had the pandemic hit. And these things are all, every business has them happen at a different level. We have the localized thing happening. We have the economy level thing. We have the global thing hit us at different points. And if we're not aware and conscious of what our numbers are as they're happening or before that event happens, then that event will throw us into a spin. And that's what I don't want people to have. I want them to be able to at least see something happening in advance. And we can't predict some of those things, but if we can see what it was based upon that information, then I can go, oh, if I take that out because of this event, whatever it is, then I can at least have some semblance of a plan so that if it does happen, then I'm not in panic. I might be in panic for a short bit of time. That's human nature. It will happen. But because I've already thought through some ideas, or I've got some numbers that I know that I can go and look at, my financial brain goes there. Now I can make better decisions because I'm not in panic. And so, yeah, whenever we're talking about dates of things happening in the future, if we're not forecasting before then, yeah, you're just waiting for trouble.
I'm delighted to hear this, Craig, because I see so many directors who, for very justified reasons, are running around worried and stressed. But then you're saying, do your numbers, know what your worst case scenario is, know what your plan is when that happens. And that's so good, because if we're, like, it's my personal opinion that the NDIS is one of the most important things in Australia. And there's many directors who are going to lose their business this year. And there are many who are actually going to lose their marriages or gradually lose connection with their kids because they chose to pursue a business that is just struggling and they don't know what to do. So I would love to see people reach out to you if they have questions. Craig, how does someone get in touch with you, Craig Minter?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is probably on LinkedIn. It's probably the most social network that I'm on. So if people just find Craig Minter via LinkedIn, or through our website is the other area, thehealthybusinesslab.com. Are probably the 2 main areas that people can find me to, help save marriages, because we've 100% had those feedback of, hey, Craig, you saved our marriage because financial stress is real and it does do that, like you've said. So that's why I love what you do and what you talk about as well, because it's spot on the mark. It's not what we want.
If I'm honest, Craig, half of what I do is like, yes, I do marketing, but I do it for the purpose of, I know the pressure on a business owner when their marketing's not working. So on the surface, I solve their websites and I solve their LinkedIn and all that stuff. My actual purpose is, I know it makes marriages better and I know it makes kids grow up still spending time with their mum or dad. So that's why I do what I do. And I know why you do it. You do things for similar reasons. Craig, you are an absolute blessing to this industry. You're a blessing to every industry that you go to. We appreciate you. And guys, it's Craig Minter, Minter. And if you can't find him, send me a message on LinkedIn and I'll connect you. Craig, thank you so much for donating your time to us today.
Great to have the chat and loving the messages that you're getting out there into the world and doing what you're doing.
I appreciate it. All right, catch you.